Chris, are we still waiting for Councillor Commis and Councillor Payne, I think now. Councillor Kennedy.
I think one might have just joined now. But yes, that is the case.
Hello.
That's Councillor Newhouse.
It's Councillor Newhouse.
Thank
Hi.
Thank you. Hello.
We're about to go live, Councillor Newhouse, so we just stand by. Good evening. Welcome to this extraordinary meeting of Burnley Borough Council's Scrutiny Committee on the 22nd of October 2020. Council members in attendance are as follows: Councillor Andrew Tatchell, Chair of Scrutiny; Councillor Marcus Johnson, Vice Chair of Scrutiny; Councillor Howard Baker; Councillor Paul Campbell; Councillor Dale Ferrier; Councillor Andy Fewings; Councillor B. Foster; Councillor Shabana Khan; Councillor Gordon Lishman; Councillor Sheris Lone; Councillor Tony Martin; Councillor Lorraine Mahana; Councillor Anthony Newhouse; and Councillor Anne Royal. We're also joined by executive members Mark Townsend, Leader of the Council; Leanne Pate, Deputy Leader and Portfolio Holder for Health and Wellbeing; Afasir Banwar, Portfolio Holder for Community and Environment; Councillor Sue Graham, Portfolio Holder for Resources; and Councillor John Harbour, Portfolio for Housing. We're also joined by Councillor Margaret Lishman, who is observing the meeting. Council officers in attendance are Mick Cartledge, the Council's Chief Executive; Lukman Patel, Chief Operating Officer; Kate Ingram, Head of Economy and Growth; Howard Hamilton-Smith, Head of Finance and Property; Christine Wood, Democracy Officer; Alison McEwen, hosting the meeting; and Chris Gay, Governance Manager, hosting the meeting. Alison McEwen is streaming the meeting. Apologies. Over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's just a 3-item agenda this evening, but it's an extremely important agenda as far as the future of Burnley is concerned. We'll kick the agenda items off straight away. Any apologies?
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Can we take the minutes of the last meeting as a true record?
Apologies, Chair. The minutes of the previous meeting on Monday, they're not ready yet, but they will be published shortly and agreed at the hopefully agreed at the meeting on the 7th of December.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional items of business to the 3?
No, Chair.
No? Okay. Declarations of interest? Any received?
No, Chair.
Okay. Exclusion of the public?
As per agenda, Chair. Yeah.
Public question time? Any request to speak?
No, Chair.
No. Okay.
Thank
So
you.
we'll go straight into the public item, which is item 7, economy recovery and growth strategy. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this item is to consider an economy recovery and growth strategy that we've been preparing over the summer, and hopefully we'll be going to exec next week for approval. I think we're all well aware that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought with it has been unprecedented and has brought some real changes in the global economy and has had a significant impact on our economy locally as well. But it's important that we respond to it effectively and efficiently, working with all our key partners to ensure that businesses and people are able to respond to the immediate crisis, but also respond longer term to our economic recovery and make a contribution to the future well-being of the borough. I think that the borough has benefited over the last decade from strong economic growth. But we are aware that there still exists a performance gap between Burnley and some of its neighbours and then the national sort of economic measures. So part of this strategy is, as well as responding to that, the initial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also continuing to respond and address some of the structural weaknesses that we know we have in our economy, particularly around skills within our workforce and innovation in our businesses. In the strategy, we've set out a new vision for the future, what Burnley might look like economically in a post-COVID world, building on our existing strengths in manufacturing and engineering, but also looking at how those businesses can go into emerging sectors, particularly in the green economy and new technologies. And also upskilling our people. We know increasingly important that people have higher levels of skills and a wider level of skills and a very different skill set to respond to the future and an increasingly digitalised economy. But also that we continue to invest in our places, in our town centres and in our key infrastructure, which will underpin our future economic growth. The strategy is based around 4 phases over a 5-year period, which we've called Respond, which was our initial response to the initial strategy and the initial lockdown. Unfortunately, we find ourselves going back to that sort of position at the moment. And I think what we have acknowledged in this strategy is that although we've got these 4 phases, they will be quite fluid. We might move quickly and then we might go back a bit. Some parts of the economy will move more quickly, and we will actually run different strands in parallel together. So the next stage is recovery, which we'd initially set at that sort of 6 to 12 month period. I think, like I say, we have gone back a little bit over this last few weeks, but that's about creating the conditions for people to return to some sort of normality in the market and start to take steps towards that longer term recovery and longer term restructuring of our economy. Renew, which is really the key part of this, and this is where we would be really working to ensure that our businesses and our people are fit for the future. And then transitioning in a reset period towards a more inclusive, innovative, higher value economy. In each phase, we've set the strategy around 3 themes. So around people, and that's very much about, in the initial stages, around protecting jobs, ensuring that anyone who becomes unemployed receives the relevant support and skill in terms of job search and skills to get back into the workplace. And longer term, as I say, around generally upskilling our labour force. In terms of businesses, working with our businesses to overcome some of the immediate issues, and that will be different depending on different sectors. But so, for example, within the engineering sector, how we diversify over the next 3 to 5 years to get over the known difficulties that the aerospace sector in particular are going to face. And as I said, the third strand is around places. So how we change, particularly our town centres, to respond to sort of new and emerging trends, and so that they're fit for the future. One of the key proposals in the strategy is to establish an economic recovery board, and that would bring together all our key partners, together with some people from the private sector, really to drive this forward, to make sure that we're responding in the right way, and also to act as a sort of unified voice and a lobby for the borough. So, some of the actions that we set out, some of the bigger strategic actions, will require additional funds, and we'll certainly use this strategy as our sort of document, our calling card, so to speak, when we're talking to the likes of the enterprise partnership or indeed the government about our future needs and any levelling up requirements. And as I say, that economic recovery board would bring a unified voice to that. In terms of the financial implications, what we will do initially is we're seeking really to make the best use of the existing resources that are out there. And there is a lot of resources around supporting people, around skills, around supporting businesses, and it's making sure that they touch down here in Burnley in a very relevant way. Over the period of time, we will start to roll out some more strategic initiatives, for example, sort of the growth of the university, and not just its growth in terms of teaching, but in terms of what it can do in terms of technology transfer, working with businesses, and this concept that we have of a university innovation zone. Those are the sorts of things where we will require additional funding. And again, as I said, this is very much about setting out our strategy for that. We're also proposing that the executive allocate some additional money to the Business Growth Fund. So the Business Growth Fund was a £1 million fund that was set up by the executive in 2013, and we've used it to support various business activities, some of it direct grants to businesses, loans to businesses, business support, business mentoring. We will review what we do with that fund going forward. So what I'm recommending is that there is an initial amount allocated, and we'd put together a detailed plan for that. And we're also asking for members to approve the establishment of an employment and skills partnership post to work with all our key partners, really to assist residents in their employment search and to ensure that they're getting the right skill provision required. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Kate. This is obviously going to the executive. It's come through scrutiny for us to give our view on it. There are basically 6 strands to the recommendation that councillors need to consider. I'll open it now. Any member with a question?
Councillor Gordon Lishman, Chair.
Gordon?
Thank you, Chair. I think members will be aware that Maggie and I have been working on this for some time, as Kate says, over the summer. I'm delighted that the proposal that we're receiving now is the same word for word as the one that was coming to the scrutiny committee from the former executive, and that it has survived whole and entire. The only changes I note are the dropping of the reference to the fact that it was based on the plan produced by the previous executive, the dropping of the reference on the Climate Change Fund to the Climate Change Working Group, so that now they won't have any voice in it, and the statement that the payment into the Business Opportunities Fund will be a first tranche. That presumably has the implication there will be future tranches. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but I assume they will go through the full normal process before we get them. I think the comment that Maggie would probably make at the council, and that I would make now, is that the overall report is characterised by quite a lot of optimism. And when I did my emergency planning work, and I think others will have done the same, the principle I always applied was to say you should hope for the best and plan for the worst. And I think there is an extent here to which we are actually planning for possibly the most likely outcome. I'm not sure about that, but certainly about a relatively optimistic outcome. And that is assuming, for instance, that there will be a vaccine in the not too distant future. And although there's a great deal of optimism about, that's not necessarily supported by the experience of all the vaccine developments. It's also assuming that the new normal after the time of this is going to be very much the same as before, with only a relatively small number of tweaks to it. Now, whether or not you think there's going to be a V-shaped recovery or it's going to take longer is part of that, but it's also whether there is a substantial change that's going on in the underlying economy. And that's illustrated by the sort of changes we've seen in the high street, with big high street names just going out of business even before COVID, and others failing to get support from the government or banks to keep going at their previous level. I do think, though, that we really need to get hold of the extent of changes to aerospace and to a lesser extent changes that are happening around automotive and other manufacturing. We are already seeing airlines going bust. We are seeing the collapse of the traditional holiday industry, with firms going out of business and failing to get further support because they're not seen as viable. Perhaps more importantly, it is now clear that international business travel, which is actually what finances and makes the profit for airlines, is going to change irrevocably. Now people have got used to communicating in this sort of way rather than going to physical meetings. And those changes will have significantly long-term effects. The same is true when you combine these changes with the Brexit changes. The Social Market Foundation has looked at the extent of those things combined with each other, not even assuming a no-deal Brexit, and they put East Lancashire in the highest category of risk to our long-term economic base arising from those different things and those different elements. There is a reference in the report to shortening supply lines, and it's a reference as an opportunity. If Airbus shortens its supply lines, or if Rolls-Royce shortens, as they have done, their supply lines to the Far East, that has a major long-term and possibly irrevocable effect on the economy of East Lancashire in general, but Burnley is actually likely to be harder hit than most others. If that happens, then our economy will have a double hit, arising not only from the general recession, which everybody is predicting as we come out of COVID, but a double hit because of the extent to which we're losing business, because of the way in which we are reliant on manufacturing and other high-risk areas of business. If that happens, we are going to be facing the sort of depression, not just recession, as a town, which other towns in Lancashire faced to a greater extent than we did in the 1960s, in the mid-1980s, and even before that. And that possibility has a major effect on town centres, on spending levels, on the sort of shops and businesses that we have in our town centre and how they will work. Now, I'm not saying any of those things are definite. What I am saying is that there is a serious likelihood being put forward by serious economists and serious analysts saying that those things are entirely possible. And if you simply think about what happens if the development of a vaccine is delayed for a year or two on our supply lines, on manufacturing, on the sort of businesses which involve a lot of people working in the same physical environment, then I think we are planning not necessarily for that sort of future, and that we need to think about it. I just want to pick up, if I may, Kate's entirely correct point about the development of green industry. This is not just a matter of being nice to a few Greens, although I'm entirely in favour of that, Andy. It's about the future of the world's economy. It is about how we place ourselves for different sorts of energy generation, for the use of artificial intelligence, for the lessons of biology being applied to manufacturing and other processes. We have to find a way, as our then town clerk did in 1940, of being ahead of that curve by finding the right sort of businesses. And I would like to see in these sorts of proposals a much more substantial emphasis, not just on some connections, but on how we go out to find the new business we need that are part of that new economy. And I think there are important ways in which we can do that and start building for it. I want to make just two very specific points on the proposal as it stands. and they're both about the proposed board. I think it's a good idea. I think a great deal will depend on finding the right chair for it, who can act as an ambassador as well as just a chair for meetings. But also, I am not sure that drawing together the existing stakeholders who are there without an additional emphasis on innovation and new ideas and green technology and economy in particular will get us where we need to be. I would want to find ways in which we could put much more emphasis on bringing innovation and new ideas to that board. I would also actually just involve somebody from the voluntary sector in it, because that is a significant part of our economy. But also, as the government starts to invest in significant amounts of new training and development, as we've seen in the past, that will involve major voluntary organisations in the delivery of that employment and the employment opportunities and futures associated with it and the training that's associated with it. And I think that we need to have some representation of that sector there. I apologise, Chair, for speaking at a greater length than usual on this subject, but you'll appreciate it's been part of Maggie's life for the last 6 months, and I've obviously learned a lot from that, and I've obviously been very much involved in contributing, and that gives me, I hope, some basis for making some additional comments on the report as presented.
Thank you, Gordon. Perfectly understandable. You thoroughly depressed me halfway through, but I think there are some pertinent points that you made there. Any other member?
Councillor Fewings, Chair.
Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to the officer for this. There's clearly a lot of work has gone into this. This isn't something, although it's come to us at very short notice, it's clearly been worked on for a very, very long time. And on the whole, I think it shows that it's been really thought out, and lots of people have been spoken to. And on that, I'd like to acknowledge what Councillor Lishman said, that Councillor Maggie Lishman did put a lot of work into this, and I know that I had a number of conversations with both Councillor Gordon and Maggie Lishman around sort of green industry and things in the town. I think it really is the right direction of travel when it comes to the low carbon, or how I like to call it, zero carbon industry, and moving into renewables. It's obviously not as far as I would go personally, but I'm glad to see the direction of travel. I'm also, confident that the new executive member has a very good knowledge of green industries. I have been pleasantly happy with how we've worked together in the climate emergency working group before the coronavirus came into place. So I know that Councillor Graham will make sure that the green credentials are upheld as this strategy is implemented. What I'd like to quickly pick up on just a few points, and Gordon said almost everything that I would want to say, so I'm delighted to tell you that this should be quite short. Just in relation to the recommendation on page 5 of the papers, paragraph Roman numeral 4, Roman numeral 3, section that says that it should be referred to the officer and the leader, etc. I just wonder whether once it's gone through the consultation at Roman numeral 1, that maybe it should come back to scrutiny to have a look at it. And I say that not to be difficult, but because this has spanned 2 different administrations, and I think that there's a lot of value in lots of people having looked at this, and I think that after a consultation we'll get a better result if it is looked at again by everyone. So that's one recommendation there. Then Roman numeral 5, I just wanted to clarify, is the Climate Change Initiative budget the Climate Emergency Working Group budget? And if so, it sounds like a really great idea, but we have a bit of I'm chair of the Climate Emergency Working Group and been trying to get some officer time to hold a meeting since February. And so I wonder whether that should be sort of approves it in principle and recommends it to the Climate Emergency Working Group. And the reason for that is that my understanding, because we've had this come up before in relation to the crematorium filter, that the recommendation for this money, as passed by full council, budget council in February, has to come from the Climate Emergency Working Group. So given that's how it has to work, perhaps it should be a recommendation to that group to consider it with the other items that are already in discussion and are awaiting feedback. So that's another point there, just to make sure that we are able to comply with how it was signed off at Budget Council. So they were quite detailed things. The other thing I want to say is that there's a reference to clean energy, and that usually makes me think that people are trying to put nuclear in with renewables. Nuclear is not a clean energy. It has nuclear waste, which lasts for hundreds of thousands of years. So I'm hoping the references to clean energy there are renewables rather than nuclear, and I would recommend we do that because nuclear as in industry, when it comes to the finance side of it, is a busted flush. It's like 3 times the cost of energy of solar. It's more than that for onshore wind, and it's about 3 times the cost of offshore wind. So when it comes to nuclear, it really is a bad investment right now, and I don't think we should be chasing bad investments as we try to diversify away from the aerospace industry and create some job security through a mix of technologies. The other thing that I would say is that I think it's really great, and it acknowledges how this is not linear and that different sectors are going to be in different stages, but I would like to see a little bit more on sectors. So, for example, manufacturing can happen across the sectors, and some sectors are actually booming right now, and a lot of those are green sectors, but also, supermarkets and delivery companies and things like that, online businesses are really booming right now. So their sectors don't need the support in the way that other sectors, which are technically in the same manufacturing space, for example, might need it. So a little bit more on sectors I would like to see. And then the final thing is I would say, please use our expertise as members. I don't say this in a bragging way, but I've worked in the renewable energy sector for 13 years, and there's a few things that I think that aren't a cost to the council, but we could look at. For example, again, in the budget council, we approved a member of staff a part-time member of staff to look at eco grants. The Green Homes grant has come in since then. I think an employee that is looking at eco and green homes grant and creating jobs locally, because you can have up to £10,000 grant for homes if you're on low incomes, and I think a lot of our households in Burnley would tick that box. So if we had that person, creating a local supplier list and pursuing that, I think that would be really, really helpful. So something like that. The other thing is that just simple things that some members might know about, and it's not necessarily as easy to find out. For example, there's a grant for rural areas to access renewables. There's £1 million available for the Northwest. So it would be good to have a sort of green grants person to look for these things, because I think they could really benefit their town. I'm happy to feed those in, and I was previously feeding information like that, which is actually, that particular thing has come to me in the last week, but I was feeding that kind of information to Councillor Lishman. I'm happy to feed that to Councillor Graham if that's helpful. But just, if there is a member of staff who's looking for these opportunities that don't require us to put money in, is actually a way for us to bring money in, that I think that would be quite useful as well. So that was a bit longer than I thought I was going to be speaking for, but thank you so much. I think this is a really great strategy, and if we can make tweaks, great. But as it is, I'm really pleased with it. So thanks to everyone involved.
Thank you, Andy. Before moving on, just picking up on a couple of those points. I mean, we do want to watch this as it rolls out. I think from a scrutiny point of view, we are enthusiastic, and so far the comments seem to be coming quite well. Just touching on paragraphs 3 and 5, I mean, if when that detailed plan is drawn up for using the fund, well, it could come back for a scrutiny scan. That would certainly be most welcome. And also the point made by Councillor Fewings on item 5 in that. I mean, if there's a difficulty with it, then tell us now. But other than that, I think we'd like to see that as it goes along and carry the business through. Have you any reaction to that, Kate?
Councillor Thatcher, I can come in on in relation
Oh,
to paragraph 5, and Kate can answer the rest of the questions. I can do the easier one first. I think when the scrutiny papers were initially published, I think a separate email was sent out. Paragraph 5 should actually read recommends to full council for the use of the £25,000 for the climate change initiatives. So budget. So the executive wasn't going to make that decision. It was put to full council to amend the budget. So Councillor Fewings is correct that the original budget was set in consultation with the climate change working group. However, full council can obviously reprofile the budget as necessary. And I think that, and Kate will expand on it in a bit more detail, but I think there's a pressing need to press on with it in a slightly quicker manner, which Kate can allude to, and that's the reason. And appropriate scrutiny can also be provided in this forum. I'll hand over to Kate to answer the more substantive points and expand on what I've just explained as well.
Thank you. Kate?
I think most of the comments that members have made, I don't think it's necessary to respond to all of them, but I think, Andy, the one you've just made was whether scrutiny would review the proposals that for the use of the growth fund. Is that correct? Is that what you're proposing?
And to have a look at the detailed plan for use of the fund from recommendation 3.
Yeah, except that I think this is what Luqman was saying, that part of the funding would be used to fund recommendation 4, and I do need to progress that piece of work quite urgently now. You know, and it's certainly an area we want to move and support our partners to deliver those services to people who are losing their jobs. So otherwise, that's not a problem. And of course, scrutiny they have in the past received regular sort of economic reports and updates. So what I'll probably look at doing is I'll review how we present that information and what we present to you, and probably frame it more in terms of what's set out in this strategy, so that you get a regular report on what's being implemented.
So we can get an update as it's going along. We're more than happy with that, I'm sure. Thank you, Kate. Any other member?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Ferrier.
Dale?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think first of all, I mean, Councillor Ishman's thing about the aviation industry thing before was, like you said, Chair, was a bit depressing halfway through. However, but I was more of a spark of optimism and thinking, because there's plenty of innovation happening in the aviation sector for the sort of green technology. I know Airbus released reasonably recently their concepts for the hydrogen-powered aircraft. Now, obviously, that would definitely do that, but it's certainly a promising look. And I believe that providing that things are opened up within the next year, the aviation industry will recover, because people have an insatiable desire to travel. Of course, he's right about the business thing. That is another question altogether. I think Councillor Fewings I think it's a bit quick to dismiss nuclear power, in my opinion. And not I would probably definitely disagree with me, but because in terms of developments in nuclear power, we're seeing Rolls-Royce developing smaller reactors, more likely say the 50 megawatt range rather than the usual the larger ones now over 1,000 megawatt production, which offer a more manageable amount of waste during their service life. And of course, I know it's the holy grail of nuclear power in the future, and being fusion, which offers, of course, next to no nuclear waste, radioactive waste. But of course, that's quite a few decades away yet before that has come mainstream. But it's something we can't simply ignore. That we can't ignore nuclear. They're constructing the next generation of reactors all around the world, and it'll be a substantial part of our power grid for the many years to come. There's one thing I did spot on page 25 of the report given to us. It's in the first paragraph about utilising our worldwide network. It says, particularly in China and the Middle East. Now, as someone who has studied China in my spare time for quite a number of years and quite a China watcher, I would certainly urge a certain degree of guarded caution about portraying ourselves in China too much, because of course the geopolitical situation in the world is shifting alarmingly fast. It is a Foreign Affairs Committee paper, so a report published today, and in paragraph 6 of that report, it says an increasingly assertive revisionist China has created a geopolitical friction with more in respect of the United States. China and Russia is leading an authoritarian revisionist powers and made it to their ideological rivals in realizing the capability of international influence lies. It goes on, includes hybrid warfare and spread of propaganda and disinformation abroad, aggressive industrial policies, including hostile takeovers. And it's the aggressive industrial policies we have not seen in history on a large scale. It's something we have to be careful, because if it is our dreams and report are realised, of Burnley being a substantial centre of research and development, of course that will prove quite interesting to those such states. And so the council must be a certain degree guarded against such revisionist, such aggressive actions by such a state, which you have seen is countless examples in the West of it happening. Of course, that should not stop us from encouraging genuine investment from over there, of course, but it's just a word of caution about engaging with such states as that at the minute. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dale. I think Councillor Martin's been trying to get in. Tony?
Thank you, Andy. I don't want to pour too much cold water on this idea, but it does seem to me we're in danger of trying to reinvent the local strategic partnerships that we had some time ago. Members will recall that Burnley's went by the very attractive name of BAP, the Burnley Action Partnership. And while the local strategic partnerships might have been very local, they weren't very strategic because all the partners wanted to keep their own money and do their own thing when it came to it. And that's why they really fell apart. Now, I'm pretty sure that the majority of people who are involved in local strategic partnerships are already mentioned in this document here, with the possible exception of the emergency services and the hospital. But it didn't work then, and I can't see it working now. So if people want to go ahead with it, what I would suggest is we have a review of what it's actually managed to do in 12 months' time to see whether we're just creating another talking shop or we're actually getting something done.
Fair comment. Did B. Foster want to come in?
Yes, Chair. Just unmute yourself, B.
There you go. It's just something to emphasise, really, something that Councillor Lishman said, really. That as I read the report, which I think is really good, really excellent and things, of course, the community, voluntary and faith sector, I felt, was very missing in lots of different ways, particularly around the people agenda, because I think that they do an awful lot of work within that. So my plea is really to just sort of tweak it a little bit, because for me, they're as important a part of the partnership in Burnley as the public and the private sector are, the voluntary community and faith sector. And I think we need to get all of those three working and complementing one another. And I know what Tony's just said, but actually I think a really good example of how it can work has been the Burnley Together Hub, which has brought all those groups together, and they've really worked very hard, and that is continuing. So maybe we can build on that to go into this. That's my plea, to not forget about the third sector. Thank you.
Thank you, B. I'm sure the executive members who are watching this will take that on board. Is there
Can,
anybody
can I
else?
respond to B's comment?
Sure, yeah.
Please. I mean, you mentioned quite rightly the Burnley Together Hub. So what we've been doing over the last couple of months is looking at how we sort of diversify what the hub's doing so that it actually works with people who are have been made redundant, who are looking for work. And we've set up initially focusing on young people, a young people hub with partners from DWP, so they're now part of the hub as well. And we're working with a range of partners, including some voluntary sector organisations as well, about how we respond and provide services to people who are unemployed.
Thank you, Kate. Does Luckman want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. In answer to B's question as well, we are working to expand the Burnley Together Hub and look at various different strands. We had a steering group meeting this week with some of the key partners in terms of what the Burnley Together Hub will look like going forward. And we hope to bring a paper to members just for information in terms of how we're going to progress the hub going forward, because it's been a real success story over the last 8 months, and it's something we need to continue to build on with a wide range of partners who have clearly displayed that it's not just their organisations they care about, there's people and outcomes that they care about as well. So that'll make its way through to scrutiny over the coming months.
Thanks, Luckman. Thank you. Anybody else, Chris?
No requests at this point, Chair, but just to note that Councillor Thomas has now joined the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take that forward then, as long as scrutiny are happy with the recommendations as laid out, and we'll pass that on to the executive and wait for the updates. Thank you. Item 8, there's a private item. Do you have to?
It is, Chair, yes. Alison will just confirm when.